Welcome back to the Deliberate Leaders Podcast. I am your host and executive coach, Allison Dunn. We are tackling the topic of how to apply leadership behaviors that stimulate stability and global growth. Our guest today is Ralf Specht. He is a visionary business leader, highly sought after speaker, and creator of the Soul System, which is a framework that aligns value creating employee action with broader corporate strategy through shared understanding and shared purpose. He also has a new book out, which is Beyond the Startup, Sparking Operational Innovation for Global Growth. And his driving passion is to make soulless companies a thing of the past. Ralf, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Allison, it's my pleasure to be with you today.
Fantastic. I like to kick these off with a deliberate conversation. What would be your number one leadership tip for our listeners today?
Well, reflect on yourself and listen to your people, because the truth, what's happening in the workplace is always with the people in the workplace. And so it's always important to have both the eyes and the ears open, and don't believe your own PR too much, and start listening to those who see what's happening.
Fantastic. Thank you for that tip.
You're welcome.
So Ralf, who did you write the book for?
Well, the first book, Building Corporate Soul, was basically inspired by the many, many emails, text messages, and other messages that I received when I was stepping down as CEO. And those were far beyond what you usually would expect of like farewell messages. They went much, much deeper. And they were basically a summary of what people felt they had experienced at our company, which was something they felt they hadn't seen anywhere else before. And so as I was going through these emails time and time again, because it was a very emotional moment for me, I thought there's two options here. I can either keep them on my iPhone and every now and then in a sentimental moment look at them and feel good, or basically write up the lessons that they taught me or taught us, and allow other leaders to participate. So that's how Building Corporate Soul came about. It basically is a book about the leadership philosophy. And the second book, Beyond the Startup, is actually the genesis of the company we created, this joint venture with Jaguar Land Rover called Spark 44, which was a global advertising marketing joint venture. And when I stepped down, we were 1,200 people in 19 offices worldwide. So quite a thing.
Yeah, that is very impressive. I would love to dive into kind of the to help us understand like beyond the startup. So what are the steps for transforming an early age startup into a robust, thriving company like Land Rover and Jaguar?
Yeah, well, Jaguar and Land Rover were our joint venture partners. So we jointly took the decision to build up the company back in 2011, and started pretty aggressively already with 4 offices and 80 people, and built it over time to the end result, 1,200 people and 19 offices. And the tricky point was in year 4, I think, when the agency was tripling in volume, in size. So by that time, we had already grown to 6 offices and 250 people. But then pretty much from one day to another, that meant like within 6 months, or actually within 4 months, we had to gear up to 14 offices and 750 people. So basically hiring 500 people in 4 months and opening another 10 offices or 8 offices at the same time. You can imagine it was not a very...
That's a transformation for sure.
Absolutely. And the reason why that worked is a very simple reason. It was because everybody was clear about the purpose of the company. We had been able in the first 4 years to create a culture and codify a culture that actually delivered value, not just to the clients, but also to each and every member of the workforce. And hence, when we got into that situation where the question was, okay, can we really build 8 new offices and hire 500 people in 4 months, where you normally would say, you're not, forget about it, it will never work. We were confident that we could make it work because we had people in all those locations already that were dyed in wool with the philosophy, with the approach, with the culture of the company. And that actually proved true. So those companies or those agencies that we had to build up from scratch actually very, very quickly became cornerstones of the culture moving forward. So it can be done, but it can only be done, I think the magic word is culture. And if you don't have that culture, it's going to be tricky, perhaps even impossible.
Ralf, what was the value proposition for the employees that you enabled you to attract that type of talent?
Well, first of all, the business model was very different. It was a joint venture with a client, which is very unusual, doesn't exist, and definitely doesn't exist on a global scale. And so for everyone who joined from other advertising agencies, when they learned about the business model, that was, I think, attraction point number one. Okay. Number two, when we started with a Jaguar brand, and it was pretty much to rejuvenate the brand and relaunch the brand, which obviously Jaguar is one of the most iconic car brands, and hence it wasn't too difficult to find people who wanted to be part of that. Third, I think the value proposition was, well, beyond words, actually, the human-centric performance approach that we had taken, the way we were interviewing people, hiring people, evaluating people, and rewarding people for great contributions and great service. And that was something many people told us they haven't seen in their previous agencies. And we did an annual survey, employee survey, and I mean, they were like verbatims, like, I feel I'm doing the best work of my life. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think the approval rate for that statement was like 95%. So, and you don't have that usually, right? Usually you are happy when you're getting positive statements with a 60, 65, 70% approval rate, and you're already good. So we were really shocked in a positive way that people really appreciated that much, and it also showed when you look at the turnover rate, which in advertising agencies usually is around 35%, 40%. Ours was like 16, 17, which is more industry, other categories benchmark. So people enjoyed the ride and they voted to stay.
That's incredibly impressive. I can't even, I'm struggling to conceptualize adding that volume of people and then getting it so spot on of where people really are doing the best work of their life, right?
Well, obviously, I mean, there's nobody's perfect, and hiring 500 people in 6 months or in 4 months doesn't mean you are taking 500 perfect decisions. Definitely.
Well, good. That makes me feel a little bit better.
That just doesn't happen. But the likelihood of taking the right decision, I think, was much higher, because the people who were hiring predominantly were in a position that they knew the context for which they were hiring. It wasn't just find me another art director or find me another copywriter or another producer or something. So it allowed them, albeit there was huge pressure to fill the positions, to mostly make the right choices.
Okay. But in any case, that's a pretty significant amount of growth in a fast period of time. So what are your best ideas on how to manage fast growth at any level?
I think what you need is, coming back to my initial statement, is a leadership team that is able to reflect what they're doing and to constantly ask themselves whether they're doing the right thing or not, because you can easily get overwhelmed. So, and that's, I think, where the second book, or the first book, comes in, Building Corporate Soul, with the framework of the soul system. You have to have a clear purpose, and I call that purpose a shared purpose, because it means it needs to be shared by the leadership team, and not just, yes, we all have heard about it. It's like, this is how we operate. And it needs to be shared with every employee. I think we were very strong in doing both things. So we got a very heavily aligned leadership team. And when we made a wrong hire, it was very obvious that within a few weeks, some colleagues were raising their hands saying, are we sure that that guy gets it or not? And then the second element in the framework is the shared understanding, to which I include vision, mission, values, and spirit. And spirit is the unexpected word in this context, because the other three are the usual suspects. And spirit, to me, is the intended culture. So as a leadership team, if you start asking yourself beyond the words, how do we want this place to feel at the end of the day? And we did an interesting exercise when we started the company, and we thought and talked about culture. We were asking ourselves, what kind of culture do we want to see and feel and experience in this place? And
I missed that. What kind of what?
What kind of culture do we want to see, experience, and feel in this place? And it was an interesting experience, because if you ask yourself that question, it's difficult to answer the question. Mm-hmm. So we flipped the question and said, so what behaviors do we not want to see? Yeah. And basically from the negative, we then were capable of defining the positive and define the culture. And then that's the third element, the shared behaviors. You got to live by them. And for instance, our performance evaluations were based on the values of the company. So every 3 months, any employee came into a situation, and every manager, to basically assess what they have been doing and what they're planning to do by the cultures of the place, which A, reminded everybody all the time, and B, contextualized the values into the real action that was happening in the workplace. And I think those are really, really critical. If you get these right, you can't avoid that the culture becomes real in the workplace, because A, you reward it, B, you recognize it, and C, you can also identify individuals that don't play by the book, and you have a regular moment to reflect on those with those employees. And sometimes it's just somebody assumed otherwise, but every now and then you also find someone who can't actually accept those values and the intended spirit, and then it's good to know that early on, so that you can then have an exit conversation early on.
I think that you've highlighted a kind of an important element that a lot of companies struggle with in identifying like what it is that they do want, and the kind of shifting that on its head, and really starting with what don't we want to see for behaviors, and that is a quick way to help you kind of whittle it down. So that's a fantastic tip for our listeners who may be struggling with what do we want in our culture and what do we value and what behaviors are behind that. So thank you for that. You used the word human-centric, and I just want to, because I feel like, maybe I don't even know what the definition of that is. How would you describe that?
The industry that I've been working in, advertising and marketing, is, I'd say, an 80% human asset kind of business. Right? You need technology, no question about it, and technology can help a lot. But at the end of the day, it's a creative business, and you need people to come up with the ideas, and you need to build the relationships with your clients, and so on and so forth. So the most important thing inside that business is the person, the individual, the human being. And so whatever you do in that kind of business environment that is not creating a sense of positivity with that person is actually counterproductive. So you need to be human-centric in driving performance in your workplace, because if you don't, you get unmotivated people, you get people who only do kind of what they have to do or less. And you get those folks that always find a reason why things are not working, rather than looking for the solution how they can be made to work. So to me, a human-centric performance culture addresses the needs of the individuals at the workplace in the context of what the company needs to achieve. Okay.
Thank you for that. So performance metrics, key performance indicators, KPIs, I don't want to use too much jargon or terminology, but I'd love to dive into that for just a moment. So how, or can you give me an example of how you were able to create and incentivize the desired performance behaviors that also met the human who was sitting at the office's needs?
Yeah, so I already mentioned the evaluation structure we had, and we did an interesting exercise one day, because you can imagine if you're looking at 19 offices worldwide, and you want to get one culture, corporate culture across. It's a bit of a challenge, because if you think of like the Northern Europeans or the Latin Americans or the Asians, well, you can pretty much name any country, their own culture of that country is unique. So one of our values, for instance, was honesty. And if you have that conversation with an Englishman, they have a hard time, if it's tricky, to be very honest. They always try to very politely move around the thing and trying to tell you in a very nice way that they actually don't have any sympathy for the idea that you just presented. On the other hand, you get the Americans or the Germans who are very blunt in that context and just give you, this is great or it sucks, right? And you've got the Latin countries where you also have a sense of, oh, we're going to make it work, it's all going to be great, type of stuff. And then the Asians who sometimes refuse to talk about anything in the first place. So you got to manage all of these, and you've got to understand as a global leader that those dynamics are in place in each of those countries, and some you might understand and some you might try to learn, but you always got to be clear about the fact that they exist and they are different. So we wondered, for instance, at one point when we looked at the evaluation scores from and compared office to office, that some offices had very high evaluation scores, but actually from a client perspective, when you overlaid the client satisfaction data, you could actually see there was a big gap. So the office leader felt that people were doing a great job, but the client didn't feel like that. And then you had other offices where it was just the opposite. So the client was ultra happy, but the leader was really very sharp on his people. And well, when you looked at the numbers, you were like, really, what's going on there? Something's wrong. But actually, nothing was wrong. It was just a cultural element of the local nuance of the culture that drove those things. So looking at KPIs is a good thing, but you have to always look into contextualize them to make real use of them. And obviously we did, and sometimes it helped a lot, because certainly some individuals figured out that they were actually a bit too much on the positive side with their people, and put it back, because the evaluations were always connected with a financial bonus. So if a leader wants to give their people a bit more and compensate for other things, then you can do that. But actually, it's not what it's supposed to be. And by having the contrast data of the client satisfaction index, it was very easy to kind of put it in the spotlight.
I feel like that type of thing happens just when you have amongst offices with different types of leaders, regardless of being in, a global settings as well. So great.
And I think when it comes to leaders and hiring leaders, I think one of the most important things, that's why I think you need to codify your culture. If a leader comes into your set, let's say you got 19 offices and you need a leader for one, and that person kicks in and you have the onboarding and everything's fine and easy, but then that person is on their own somewhere remotely. And if your culture isn't codified strongly enough, then actually that leader, by nature, fills the void, and over time, you might run the risk that he creates his culture in the office, and it's no longer the entire corporate culture. So codifying that culture and being clear, that's why I'm always talking about shared purpose and shared understanding and shared behavior, because if everybody knows, then people can identify an issue. And if you have a culture where people are or feel all right when they question things, then those things pop up very quickly, and you can act upon them rather than be surprised 2 years later when you think like, what happened here?
Yeah. Creating a codified culture in a global community, I'm sure, is no small challenge at all. What does the structure look like organizationally to have that happen? And then I've got a follow-up question on, like, how do you codify it? Like, how much do you need to talk about it? How much time is spent in communicating that?
A lot.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I was talking to a former client the other day, and I said, so what do you hate most of in your current job? And he said, well, it's repetition. You got to tell the same thing again and again and again, and kind of when you can't listen to yourself anymore, when you can't hear it anymore, it's probably the moment when people get it. And so, as a leader, you got to act as the role model. I mean, people look at you, and people talk about you when you're in the room or not. And so you've got to be very clear what you're doing and what you're not doing. I mean, the way we codified the culture, we started obviously on the leadership level with, and I mean, we were a global company, and we had the initial 4 offices were LA, Shanghai, Frankfurt, and London. Now, Frankfurt, London is kind of easy because it's a 1-hour flight, but LA, Shanghai, LA, London, LA, Frankfurt is a little bit of a drama if you start doing that now and then. And so this is like 10 years ago, so there was no Zoom. And
Right.
whenever people were joining, they were like, they couldn't believe kind of the use of technology. So at the time it was GoToMeeting, which we used. So when people asked me where's your headquarters, and I said, well, our headquarters GoToMeeting, because we were all, there was one guy here, one guy there, and so on.
That's a great answer.
Yeah. And it actually created a culture in which people knew that they always had a counterpart in another office. And since we had to deliver like the full communication matrix, none of the offices was fully equipped to do that. So by design, they had to cooperate, so that created a strong bond, because nobody had the resources to deliver everything on their own. So that was helpful, but we made sure that every I think 2 or 3 months we met in person for 2 days, and as the company grew, we basically did 3 leadership meetings a year, 2 with the let's say first line of reporting, and 1 with the wider group. So the wider group was like 70 people ish, and one breakthrough that we had, which was a real opportunity, was at one point, because obviously advertising agencies, you probably heard that, they are never happy with the briefings the clients are writing up. They always feel there's something missing, or it's not clear enough, and so on and so forth. And obviously, I haven't met any client who is kind of fed up with that, because they are like, come on. And so we basically created a new model for that, and because we basically said, let's do one thing. We write the briefings ourselves, and you just vote on the results. We don't get involved in the briefing and all those. We just talk briefly about kind of the context that we're looking at, but then you can leave us alone. The only thing you have to do is come to the presentations and bring budget, so that you can produce at least one of these ideas. And the first one was when we did it the first time, all 19 agencies presented individually on the various briefs, and the clients were overwhelmed. And they said that we brought budget for 3 ideas, but we actually now producing 6. So it was success all over the place. Happy client, happy agency folks, and great work at the end of it. And if you develop things like that, and you can, that's an example for that industry, but you can replicate the model for other industries in terms of co-creating, or whatever is the key element that you want to change. Do it, give it a name, make sure it happens on a regular basis so that people don't perceive it as a one-off, and then do it and merchandise the hell out of it.
Good tips. I think in that consistency and continuing to do it and evolving it is such a huge factor of it. In your introduction, I happened to mention that you are the creator of Soul System.
Yes.
My personal Allison Dunn theme word for the year is a soulful journey. So I'm interested. What is your Soul System? Can you tell us?
Well, I mean, the Soul System is that framework, the shared purpose, shared understanding, shared behavior. And obviously, when you look at that, it's a bit abstract, right? So we can take that one level further. If you think about if you think about the shared purpose, you can basically replace shared purpose with the being inside the company, right?
Yeah.
And so when about the being in the company, there's two questions that people need to reflect on. First one is, why am I here? And the second one is, why are we here? Yeah. And it's a simple question, but it's not going to be a simple answer usually. So why am I here and why are we here? So that's the first level. Shared purpose equals being. The second level, shared understanding, to me equals believing, right? So what do we believe in and how do we shape belief in others are the two questions. Again, so it's codifying culture. How do we shape that belief in others that this is something that is worth working for, working with, and so on and so forth. The third element, behavior, which is all about belonging, right? So how, what does it feel like to belong here, and how do we create belonging for others? And when you look into some of the recent studies, there's a McKinsey study about why people are leaving the workplace in spades. And it's a great study because it looks at the problem from two ends. One end is the employee and the other one is the employer. And the employer believes, well, people leave because they get more money elsewhere, they get a promotion, or perhaps there's a health issue, they have to leave or something like that. But the employees are basically saying, number one reason, I don't feel any sense of belonging. Number two, I'm not feeling valued by my manager. And number three, I'm not feeling valued by my organization. So you look at that and you go like, well, actually, it's not that hard, isn't it? I mean, because the only thing people are asking for, I mean, obviously they want to be paid fairly and so on and so forth, but the only thing they are asking for is that people recognize their work, right?
Yes.
I came across another statistic the other day, which was about 50% of the people that have left their workplace said in their exit interview that nobody asked them to stay.
Nobody asked what?
Asked them to stay.
To stay.
Think about that. I mean, it's absurd, right? I mean, everybody
is absurd.
Everybody knows how long it takes and what effort it takes to find the right employee. And then you might have him or her, and you don't tell them that they are the right employee. So, and this is again where it's a full circle. You get back to these regular evaluations. People understand why they're being valued. So you have an instant reward system on a regular basis. And as a leader, you have these conversations like 4 times a year. Beyond like any other conversations, if you don't understand during those 4 times why people are considering to go, then I think you're the wrong leader, because at one point you need to be able to read the signs and have that conversation. If the person is valued and you want to work with him or her moving forward, just tell them.
In the organizations that I work with, often when we encounter maybe someone who is asking to be asked to stay and they're saying they're leaving instead, when you ask, you open up a whole new level of conversation that usually works things out. And it's a win-win.
Yeah, and people all of a sudden feel a level of involvement they've never had before. Yeah. Which also is weird, because as a leader, as a team manager, the one thing you want is people who are fully involved and know what they're doing and why they're doing it and so on and so forth. Yeah. But again, coming back to the being and the purpose questions, Another interesting study is when there's the Power of Purpose Index in the US, and they've looked into the question, does your purpose, your company purpose, motivate you to get up in the morning? And the best number is 75%, I think, for senior executives. It's no surprise, because I think they predominantly have worked on that purpose statement, and so they're very close to it. But then when you get down the ranks to middle management or junior staff or frontline workers, the numbers go down below 50, right?
Yeah.
So all of that speaks to this notion of shared purpose, shared understanding, and shared behavior. Because, and there's one company, when I was researching for the Building Corporate Soul book, there was one company that I came across which I was really stunned seeing. I couldn't believe it. There's one company in the world whose employees respond with 100% yes on the question,
Wow.
are you proud to be with this company? And that company is Lego.
That's awesome. And I can imagine that too. Like, that resonates with me, with their brand in every way. Yeah. Ralf, thank you so much for joining us here today. I just want to kind of put out the question: what would be the best way for people to follow and or connect with you?
Yeah, people can easily connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the easiest one. People can also get to my website, which is buildingcorporatesoul.com. You can register for a newsletter, and you can also do one little thing, which only takes 4 or 5 minutes, I'd say. You can do a soul check and check the soul of your company and see where you are or where your company is, and have a sense of whether you're on the right track or whether there's work to be done. I
love that. I will include that link in the show notes for people to be able to go to. Ralf,
thank you very much.
So much for joining us here today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Alison, thank you very much for having me.